Good.
Oh, Gary.
Welcome back, everybody. If I could have everybody in the room get your seats. Reverend Clark.
Product line director.
All right, so maybe you should just say hi.
If we could have everybody take their seats.
PFAS treatment.
All right, we're going to get going with our next round of presentations, and this is all on PFAS remediation. Our moderator for this session is Gary Rose, who's the PFAS program manager for Sevenson Environmental Services, and Gary also serves on our steering committee. So, Gary, I'm going to let you take the realm, sir. All yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session on PFAS remediation. Today, I'm hoping everybody got their coffees in them, and we're ready to go for the second session. Really excited. We have 5 presenters today on this. We have 1 virtual, 1 pre-recorded, and we have 3 live here. So looking forward to hearing the presentations. Over the last few days, we've talked regulatory, we've talked legal, we've been talked investigation. So I guess for this portion of it, let's just pretend that's all behind us. And, we are now going to start implementing and executing in the field for the remedial cleanup. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stephen Rosansky. He will be doing a virtual presentation this morning. So Stephen, you can take it away.
Okay, do I have control? Okay, there we go. Okay, hello. Yes, my name is Steve Rosansky. I am a senior engineer with Battelle Memorial Institute. Been with Battelle for about 30 years. I'm currently managing our development of a supercritical water oxidation for PFAS, as well as working on a Navy document to compile state-of-the-art. Where are we at with developing, the remediation technologies? Of course, a wide range of technologies out there that are being developed. So pulling together all that information and what information, where are we at? What are some of the data gaps, and where are we going? So this presentation is maybe an overview of that, I guess, a little snippet of it, I guess. As Joe mentioned this morning, a lot of the information that I do have in this presentation is from the ITRC website. I think he mentioned that there's a great guidance document. It's not just about assessment. It's all aspects of PFAS, including remediation. So that's a very useful resource. Another useful resource is is SERDP, which is the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, and of course its sister, the ESTCP, Environmental Security Technology and Verification Program. Quite a mouthful. They have a website that, of course, they fund PFAS remediation, and there's a lot of excellent projects on there. I've also included a couple of slides at the end of this presentation with a number of references that I call out in the presentation. So it's another resource if there's certain technologies that you're interested and want to learn more about. Let's see. Next slide. Okay, so as we all know, PFAS is a very challenging group of contaminants. Due to there's a ton of them, right? There's over 5,000 different PFAS with a wide range of chemical and physical properties. Of course, there's the strong, one thing they all have in common is the very strong carbon-fluorine bond that is, the most recalcitrant bond in chemistry, so very difficult to break. There's other issues too, just because, this is new to us, so we're learning. So there's a lack of field data. I think a lot of bench scale work is undergoing, continues, and some pilot scale work, but there's still a lack of field data. We know there's also issues with precursors that we can't measure, we don't measure, various PFAS that we don't measure, byproducts associated with some of these technologies. So all of this together, having these data gaps, it makes it very challenging for us to understand reaction mechanisms, what byproducts are we really forming, et cetera. The other issue is the evolving regulatory landscape. I mean, it's changing fast. So what is either regulated or there's a guidance value for now, we can treat to that. We can use something like activated carbon and treat PFAS to less than 70, or not PFAS, PFOA and PFOS to less than 70 parts per trillion. But what about the other compounds? What about the shorter chain compounds that may not absorb as well? They may pass through the carbon. And then 5 years down the road, we find out, well, PFAS is going to be regulated. And then what? We now have created a larger PFAS plume. So that's something that we have to take into consideration, that the technologies not only need to address today's concerns, but also concerns in the future, potential concerns. So one thing I want to mention is the EPA recently came out with interim guidance for destruction and disposal guidance for PFAS. This was late last year. Consolidates the latest information on current options for PFAS disposal and management. Doesn't, specify specific methods and technologies. It does discuss some of the innovative technologies that are out there. It does focus on thermal treatment, landfilling, and underground injection for disposal. Now, one thing in this guidance that they do is, you can see this table on the right, is as part of this guidance, the EPA has ranked disposal and treatment options based on what they perceived as risk. So lower risk options being at the top, higher risk options being lower. So the preferred method at present is that, okay, we take this PFAS impacted waste and we store it for a period of 2 to 5 years. And that's to allow time for these technologies to become more developed, and we can ensure that the methods we use to destroy it are indeed effective. We don't have byproducts, we don't have other issues, associated with them. The next technologies of permitted deep well injection, followed by permitted and solid waste landfills, and then, higher risk technologies being the hazardous waste combustors and other various types of thermal treatment, which of course right now there's a lot of public concern and certain perceptions associated with that. So this presentation, I'm focusing on some of those technologies that are either more current and developed, and then others that are in the process of being developed and demonstrated, really focusing on, what can we do with that interim, that waste that's being stored, storing waste until these technologies are better developed. Now, I broke this up into just a little bit of overview of in situ and ex situ technologies. There's some trouble here advancing, there we go. So first talk a little bit about the ex situ technologies, and these can be broken into 2 categories. You have separation technologies. These consist of adsorption, filtration, flocculation. These technologies are more developed. Of course, we use these technologies all the time for other contaminants of concern or wastewater treatment plants and whatnot. They consist of, granular activated carbon, ion exchange. There are others that are being developed, like biochars and other types of reactive amendments or absorptive amendments. Of course, reverse osmosis is used widely, for other applications and can be used to remove PFAS. Nano and ultrafiltration, maybe a little bit less developed for removal of PFAS, but it is, technologies are being used. Various coagulants and flocculants that are commonly used in wastewater treatment plants can help to treat PFAS. The other group of technologies include the transformation technologies. And these are the technologies that result in destruction or breaking, cleaving that carbon-fluorine bond. Of course, again, that bond being very recalcitrant, it's very challenging to do this. From what I've seen, most of the technologies that are being developed are relying on oxidation reduction reactions, whether it's oxidation or reduction or a combination of both. I've listed some over here: supercritical water oxidation, hydrothermal oxidation, solvated electrons, photochemical oxidation, electrochemical, sonochemical, plasma. There's high energy electron beams, that are being tested. So in there, those are mostly in the bench and in some pilot scale applications of these technologies. A couple of the bigger concern are, what are the reaction mechanisms? What byproducts are you generating? How uniformly do you destroy PFAS? I mean, shorter chain versus longer chain are some of the, areas of research. So some examples, starting out with some of the, I'll call them the go-to technologies. So again, these are ex situ, absorption, carbon absorption, and ion exchange are, those are the technologies that we're using right now to treat water, whether this is a wastewater treatment plant or groundwater extracted from a site. They work. We can basically treat any type of PFAS. The question is residence time and absorption capacity. I think one thing that we need to be cognizant of is that, if we are treating something like, a longer chain PFAS like PFOA or PFOS, great, we'll have a certain breakthrough time. And once we see that occurs, we can change out our media. However, there may be other compounds, shorter chain ones that don't absorb as effectively, that may break through earlier, and that, these aren't necessarily regulated at this point in time, and they may be a concern, moving into the future. Another limitation kind of this technology is that, okay, we now have this media that is saturated with PFAS. What do we do with it? Some of what's being done is looking at ways of regenerating it. I know there's companies out there regenerating ion exchange. Battelle has actually patented a method for regenerating activated carbon. And, so then that results in a much smaller, more highly concentrated stream of liquid waste that then needs to be either further treated or disposed of. These technologies can be less effective when the PFAS concentrations are higher, of course, because you reach the absorption capacity faster and then need more frequent changeouts. Some of the research is being done is developing more effective materials. How do we increase absorption capacity? There was, I don't remember, it was a CERTIP or ESTCP project where it was looking at applying an electrical charge to increase the absorption capacity, and then also reverse that to enhance desorption of the PFAS from the carbon. So there's a lot of work going on in that area. Another kind of go-to technology is reverse osmosis. It's very effective, point of use, especially in people's homes and whatnot. It's been demonstrated to be effective. Reverse osmosis is also a good technology for concentrating waste streams. If you want to treat a smaller volume, we're actually using it as part of our supercritical water oxidation process. The disadvantage or limitations, pre-treatment is necessary to remove solids. I mean, this isn't an issue when we're treating, potable water that's already had that pre-treatment, again, point of use at a residence or something like that. But it is a big problem when you're treating groundwater because of all the minerals and solids, TDS and everything else in that water. Then, of course, you have to replace the membranes frequently, or if not replace them, at least clean them. And so there's some O&M. It's a little bit more difficult than absorption and ion exchange, with respect to groundwater applications. So nanofiltration too, somewhat related to reverse osmosis. I think there's a little bit less known about it. Some additional research needs to be done, better understand the removal efficiencies and whatnot for that. And then identifying secondary or methods to treat some of the secondary waste from these technologies are needed and are being developed, which some of the technologies I'm talking about here can do that. First, supercritical water oxidation. This is something I'm working at Battelle to develop this technology. I know there's a couple other companies out there also working on supercritical water oxidation. But basically what you're doing is reacting it's groundwater that contains PFAS, combining it with an oxidant at a temperature and pressure above the supercritical point of water. Strange things happen when you exceed that, and that's about 705 degrees Fahrenheit and 3,200 PSI. There's no distinction between the gas and the liquid phase. Mass transfer, therefore, is very fast. Reaction kinetics are very, very fast. Some other issues are in some way an issue, in some way helpful, is the polar substances like salts become insoluble, so they drop out. So, we have to deal with that. We have to remove those salts. On the other hand, non-polar substances like petroleum hydrocarbons, chlorinated ethenes, common contaminants that we see at sites that also contain PFAS, they become fully miscible, and so therefore they're easily treated. And not only are they easily treated with the technology, they have a certain heating value. So they generate heat, and concentrations are high enough that limits the amount of heat input we have to put into the system. Some of the limitations, because we are separating out salts during this, you can't have reactor plugging. You have to design these things with salt separators. We do the byproduct or the reaction products from this, of course, are carbon dioxide, water, are the innocuous ones, but we also generate hydrofluoric acid. And that, of course, creates some corrosion issues, especially these high temperatures and pressures. So they need to be treated. We have to neutralize that. And we need to use somewhat exotic alloys, C276 or Inconel, not just stainless steel. It's not anti-corrosive enough, I guess. So current research needs, we've demonstrated this. At Battelle, we've demonstrated the ability to treat IDW to greater than 99.9% removal, AFFF, 6 orders of magnitude reduction. So it's very effective. The question now is, being able to scale it up, how much energy can be required, looking at byproducts and how to mitigate those. Sometimes we will see some pyrolysis products if we don't have enough oxygen or adequate mixing and whatnot. So those are some of the areas that we're working on. Electrochemical oxidation is another innovative technology where electrical current is passed through a solution to oxidize PFAS. You have an anode and a cathode. Advantage of this technology is you're operating in ambient conditions. It really doesn't take that much energy, and you don't need chemical oxidants. I think, I recall that the residence time is a little bit greater than what we see with supercritical water oxidation, which is actually less than 10 seconds for that technology. I think we're in the minutes with this, but it's good technology, and there's definitely additional work that needs to be done to evaluate reaction mechanisms, generation of toxic byproducts, how are contaminants volatilized. Do these anodes, cathodes need to be replaced, which can be fairly expensive. This has been demonstrated at the bench and pilot scale. Again, and this is really for all these oxidation technologies. We need to understand the reaction mechanisms better. EPA is funding a project to demonstrate this in the field, and those results should be available towards the end of 2021, so this year. Another technology that also uses electrodes and electricity, which I think is really neat, is plasma. So in this case, we are introducing high voltage electricity in gas, creating these gas bubbles where the reaction occurs, generate very highly oxidative species, hydroxide, superoxide, peroxide, that then can oxidize the PFAS. In addition to this, at the bubble itself, the temperatures become very high. 1,000 Kelvin, and you generate a shock wave. So these different mechanisms help to break that carbon-fluorine bond. It's reportedly not adverse by co-contaminants. And interesting too, even though this is really, it's an oxidation, or part of it's an oxidation reaction, it also may be a reduction reaction. These aqueous electrons are formed, which studies are indicating that aqueous electrons, can destroy, break that carbon-fluorine bond by another reaction mechanism. So that's another benefit of this technology. There is, some of the work today, you see some formation of short chain PFAS and other byproducts, so those need to be further evaluated. Again, understanding reaction mechanisms and byproduct formation, it's a common theme for these innovative technologies. Now, transitioning to in situ technology, these can be broken into three groups. First, you have the immobilization technologies, which impede movement of contaminants in the subsurface with the objective to mitigate risk to nearby receptors. They consist of colloidal activated carbon, reactive amendments. You may have heard of Rembine. So there's some options there. These are introduced into the aquifer and they immobilize the contaminants. I think Chad will be talking about the colloidal activated carbon here in a little bit. Mobilization technologies do the opposite. They facilitate movement of contaminants through and out of the subsurface. Soil flushing, and I don't think soil flushing has really been very well demonstrated yet, but it's complement soil washing, which is actually performed ex situ. So you excavate the soil and do the washing, and that's a little bit more common and demonstrated. Although, if we have the surfactants that can remove the the washing agents that can remove it ex situ, we should be able to do it in situ too. Thermal desorption, of course, is another area. Foam fractionation, which is an innovative technology. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then phytoremediation, which really do I categorize this as mobilization, immobilization, or transformation? It's a little bit of everything. You're mobilizing the contaminants from the through the root system, and then the contaminants are transporting into the rest of the tree, which can then be, the leaves can be harvested and remove it that way. In some cases, some of I think the smaller chain compounds might be transformed, but again, additional work is needed in that area. So the last group of technologies is transformation, and these are the ones that, of course, break the carbon-fluorine bond to chemically transform the PFAS into, ideally, innocuous byproducts. These are the technologies, of course, that ex situ were doing a lot of research, a lot of money is being investigated to understand those. In situ, we have our common technologies, bioremediation, chemical oxidation. Those are proven for other technologies, but again, or other contaminants. But because of the nature of these contaminants, they're a little bit more challenging, and results have been mixed to date. I'll talk a little bit more about bioremediation in a minute. So first example of the immobilization, again, I think you'll hear a little bit more about this in the session later. Colloidal activated carbon, I think it's very far along. There have been some field demonstrations. It's been shown to be able to very effectively remove PFAS, keeping in mind that the colloidal carbon is very small, and other studies, ex situ studies, have shown like powdered activated carbon is much better than granular activated carbon due to its small size. So it stands to reason that the colloidal carbon would also work very well. It's just a matter of getting it into the ground. You can do that by soil mixing or injection of a suspension. Again, this is proven for other technologies or other chemicals such as petroleum hydrocarbons, chlorinated solvents, and we know carbon absorbs PFAS. So as long as you can get that contact, it should work well. And I think there's some good data out there showing that it does. Limitations is, well, it's not destroying the contaminants, it's binding it. And we need to understand how long will those contaminants remain sorbed? Will they back diffuse over time? How do co-contaminants compete for sites? Of course, do the shorter chain ones sorb as well? Probably not, at least from what we're seeing above ground, but it's possible we can develop amendments that or methods to facilitate absorption of the shorter chain compounds as needed. And then, of course, the aquifer chemistry itself can impact absorption capacity. So those are things we need to better understand. Mobilization, I like this foam fractionation technology. Several companies are working on this, and including Geosynthetic, who I know is a sponsor of this conference. You know, this is a very interesting one where air is bubbled into PFAS impacted water to mobilize the PFAS to the air liquid interface. That's because of the surfactant properties of the PFAS. They want to rise to that interface, at which point it's then removed by various methods of suction or skimming or that sort of thing. And then, of course, that frothy foam needs to be disposed or further treated. It's going to have higher concentrations of PFAS. Pretty simple process, and so also would be well suited, I think, for plume migration, because you can install wells kind of like in a formation of permeable barrier and prevent migration of the PFAS plume. It's also being used ex situ too, primarily to concentrate waste streams. So, you know, you can concentrate the PFAS. We have a lot of PFAS contaminated water. Want to use one of those oxidation technologies I was talking about, you know, concentrate it with the foam fractionation and then oxidize the residual. There are some issues and additional areas of research. I mean, needing to understand how to control the emissions. Removing the PFAS uniformly. We already know that the PFSAs are more easily removed than the carboxylates due to the greater hydrophobicity. Longer chains, you know, for any PFSA or a PFCA, you know, looking at the longer chain ones are going to be much more readily absorbed than the shorter chain ones. So again, understanding that is going to be important moving in the future, so we can dose appropriately and understand if we need to, you know, apply additional amendments in the future. So understanding that is, you know, an important part of the future research. So lastly, transformation, focusing on bioremediation here, because, you know, bioremediation, I think my mind's kind of like a golden egg, right? I mean, it's something that's worked very well for other contaminants of concern, works in situ. It's easy to apply, economical as a result. Of course, right now, there's a lot of limitations with bioremediation. You know, we don't get complete reactions to form, you know, desirable end products anyway. We know that some PFAS precursors can be converted into PFAAs. We've seen that at sites where bioremediation has been performed to treat other types of contaminants. So we need to understand this better. Now, recently there have been a couple of microbes that have been identified that can degrade PFAS, including this acetomicrobium and a Pseudomonas parapulva that has successfully removed a relatively high concentration of PFAS and PFOA. But still, there's a long way to go here, you know, until we're ready to apply this in the field. CERDUP understands this, and just last year there was a call for proposals, and they funded, you can see on this table on the right, funded a number of proposals to better, you know, understand efficacy as well as elucidate, you know, reaction mechanisms for biodegradation, and, you know, looking at ways of improving this technology. So as I'm toward wrapping this up, if I can move to my next slide. Whoops, I had one other slide. I just want to mention here that, you know, I think treatment trains will be a very important part of what we do to address PFAS, whether that's in situ or ex situ. They can be applied simultaneously or sequentially. There's an example here at a site where colloidal activated carbons was used to treat a PFAS plume, while an oxygen amendment was used to biodegrade petroleum hydrocarbons in the area. So that's kind of a simultaneous application. An example of a sequential application would be an ex situ application of granular activated carbon to absorb PFAS, and then using a regeneration technique to desorb the PFAS from the carbon, and then using something like supercritical water oxidation to destroy the regenerant. But there's a number of, obviously, a wide range of options for combining the technologies. I know that CERDIP and ESTCP are currently funding, I've listed 2 technologies here. I think they both have to do with using plasmas, the ex situ portion of the technology, along with in situ parts of it. But there's plenty more out there that's being done, and it's something that I think in the end, will, just due to the challenging nature, there's so many issues with PFAS, making them so challenged to be able to completely degrade. We may need multiple technologies to do that. So in summary, right now, EPA, really, they I won't say prefer, but see that storage and future treatment is probably one of the lower risk options for dealing with PFAS until some of these technologies are better developed and vetted. There's a wide range of technologies under development. I've only talked about a few of them, but there's a lot of them out there. Absorption, ion exchange, reverse osmosis, they tend to be the go-to technologies for ex situ treatment. The majority of ex situ treatment technologies at this point in time, at least for, I guess I'm referring more towards groundwater. There are other technologies for soil. There's like a mechanochemical technology that's really neat that uses balls to steel balls to break the bonds, in soil and other solids and stuff like that. But just the groundwater technologies alone, there's a wide range of them. And, conventional technologies as are just don't adequately, address PFAS, but these other technologies are emerging. And, we need additional research. Again, the big issues are understanding reaction mechanisms, understanding byproducts, understanding the mass balance. All of these have, inherent challenges right now associated with them. So those are, some of the areas. I wanted to mention too that there's some ongoing research here by CERDIP that's going to result, I think, some tools or guidance documents. The one at the bottom is of particular interest, and it's developing a decision tool for lines of evidence to assess the effectiveness of PFAS remediation technologies. So, there are so many technologies that are being developed. Everyone has their claims what the technology can do, but are they, how do you compare apples to apples? What's real? What's not? What will they do? What are the advantages? What are the limitations? So they're working on developing this lines of evidence approach to allow practitioners and site owners to better assess what is most promising for the site. So with that, I'd like to say thanks. I think I'm about a little bit past my time, and appreciate for you listening to this. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it. A lot of good stuff. For our next speaker here, we have Dale for the source removal combined with drinking water and on a PFAS contaminated groundwater side. Thanks. Welcome back.
All right. Thanks, Gary. All right. Looks like we'll test this real quick. Oh, wow. Those work good. How's everybody doing? Just find the conference good? I hope. It's nice to get out and actually see people. So my talk, I'm Dale Wynkoop. I'm with ECT2. I'm the Global Director of Business Development. We're talking about a project here with a couple different contamination sources. So quickly, the presentation outline, I'm going to give a very brief history and the background of the project, cover the pilot testing. We got a couple different pilots that we ran at this site, discuss the full-scale systems that are there, and then finally followed up with a quick summary. So you can see one of the projects right here on the right. So a quick history and the background. You can see the site over here. This is Pease Air Force Base right over here. What we're talking about is a couple of things here. But back in 2014, there was sampling that was done. They found that there was PFAS in the well. It had reached to an on-site daycare center, which wasn't very good, as well as to some off-site residential properties. So there was basically an administrative order back in August of 2015, which directed the Air Force to put in some emergency remediation systems to protect the water. And then 2019, we're up to 2 mitigation systems there at the site and 1 for a drinking water plant. So if you look at the site here, we've got the fire training center right up here, which they call Site 8. And we also have the Haven well down here. Just a real quick quiz here. And I know you guys don't want to quiz on a Friday, but anybody know what the significance of that 1797 underneath the Haven well means? Anybody?
Year the well was drilled.
Damn straight it is. I got a prize for you, Mr. Ford. Look at that. Good job. All right, he wins them. No more quizzes. All right, so what happened? The immediate intermediate system went in. They put some GAC on. That was the technology of the choice at the time. They realized that because of the high levels of PFAS, which was around 2,500 ppm or PVT, sorry, they were changing the carbon on a regular basis, probably too high than they wanted to. The O&M costs were too high. So the Air Force came in and directed AMAC Foster Wheeler at the time to run a side-by-side pilot using the existing GAC that was in the system next to ECT2 Sorbix regenerable resin. Remember, this is way back in 2016, so it's been around for a while. And you can see the picture here of the pilot system. Basically, it's a side-by-side comparison. If I go to the next slide, you can see kind of a real rough process flow diagram here. Same water source comes through, and then we've got 4 GAC vessels with sample ports before and after each vessel, so we can take samples at 2.5 minute, 5 minutes, 7.5, and 10 minute empty bed contact time. The lower system here is our system. We've got 3 vessels here, and then kind of a breakdown real quickly of what was in the water. You can see predominantly that it's PFAS and PFOA over on the right. And what we've got shown here is 2 charts. These are the lab results, and these are both tested at 5 minutes. The incoming, and this looks a lot easier when I'm on my computer. I can't read it. 25 to 30 parts per billion for PFAS coming in. That's the gray line here. And then about 10 to 12 ppb coming in for the PFOA. And at the 5 minute empty bed contact time, you can see the samples that we're taking. The orange is the GAC, which broke about 3,000 bed volumes. And then the bottom line is the regenerable resin, which you can see, was non-detect all the way out here. Additionally, the PFOA, the carbon broke rather quickly, about 3,000 bed volumes as well. And the regenerable resin actually broke at about 17,000 bed volumes. Additionally, while we were there, we actually did regenerate on site, and it's kind of hard to read this, but you can see the lead vessel is the red one. It was regenerated, was put in a lag position, and basically stayed good. And then it switched again. The green is now the new lead, and so forth. But you can see that the water chemistry did go back and perform non-detect for a while. So we proved that we can definitely get performance out of a regen system. So here real quick is the actual full-scale system under construction at the top, and then the finished building at the bottom. The system was designed for 110 gallons a minute, but the capacity is about 200 gallons a minute. They wanted to have some extra capacity. And as you can see down here, this is the fire training area, the P Site 8, and the water gradient. You can see the water is definitely going off site, which was contaminating the local residential wells. Startup was in April 2018. And here you can see the full-scale system. So on the left over here is our repure system, which is the regenerated. It's regenerated in situ inside these tanks. We also have some polishers over here just to ensure that we've got compliance. The key to our system, though, is the distillation and the recovery of our spent regenerate. Once you regenerate the system, you've now got a contaminated regenerate that's got PFAS and a couple other constituents. We actually distill the regenerate which creates a still bottoms right here, which is then transported and put through our, what we call our superloader vessels. So based upon what you heard in the last presentation, there's a lot of research on destruction. What would happen is we actually part of those projects is instead of sending the still bottoms to a superloader media, we're working on now destroying that very highly concentrated PFAS solution with the plasma and the EO and so forth. So right now, what will happen is once the superloader gets fully consumed with PFAS and it starts to leak, then this media that's inside this vessel will be taken off and either landfilled or incinerated, sent to a cement kiln, something like that. So here's some test results. You can see it started back in August of 18. Right now, I think the data goes up to June of 2020. And as it started out, again, it started between 60 and 100 parts per billion and has gradually worked its way down because we're cleaning the site to about 20 to 40 parts per billion. And then the green line on the bottom is actually the effluent coming out of our ion exchange system. So all non-detect up to this point. And what's interesting to note is we've treated about 43 million gallons of water to date. We have done 6 full scale regenerations. And as of now, we have not taken any PFAS waste off site. So that superloader that I talked about has not been consumed yet. So basically it's a 1,000,000 to 1 concentration. So a much more sustainable and economical way to basically treat PFAS that's highly contaminated. And here's some more data here that shows the PFAS plus PFOA. It's the blue line. Pretty boring graphs actually when all it shows is non-detect. So. Now, along with that Site 8 groundwater remediation system, they also had that Haven well, which we talked about before, which was contaminated and was a source of water for the city of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And again, they wanted to put the Haven well is actually taken offline because of the PFAS. And because of the good work we did in the original pilot, they wanted to test ion exchange resin for the drinking water well. Now, what's different about this one is instead of being regenerable, this is a single-use ion exchange resin. So a pilot was conducted there, again, side by side using GAC as well as a single-use resin that ECT2 has. Incoming water was about 3,000 nanograms per liter. And you can see some tests here. Over on the left is the results from the GAC with incoming PFAS, PFOA of, what's that say, about 3 parts per billion. And then we've got data plots here for 2.5 minutes, 5 minutes and 10 minutes. So you can see pretty quickly that the reason GAC runs at 10 minutes is because it's just doesn't make economical sense to be running anything lower. You can see also that the bed volume broke, around 40,000 liters were treated. And side by side over here, we've got the single-use ion exchange resin over here where it ran for about a year with no detection. So based upon those results, the city of Portsmouth had hired Weston Sampson as their engineering consulting firm. They did a life cycle analysis for the full-scale system, for the drinking water system. They found that the single-use ion exchange resin had about 13 times the capacity of GAC, and that had a lower overall life cycle of about a half, and the annual operating cost was about a third. So you can see the full-scale system here on the right. This is the final design. It is up and just about ready to get started, I think, right now. So. Now I've gone kind of quick through this, but in conclusion, ECT's got a couple different technologies here, the regenerable as well as a single-use ion exchange that can be used at various different applications. The key here really is the ability to regenerate on site, coupled with that treatment of that spent regenerate is a very economical and sustainable solution to reducing the amount of waste that goes back into the environment. Again, single-use ion exchange can be used and has a higher capacity than other absorption technologies. And what we showed here is that we have a combination of both single-use and regenerable ion exchange for a solution for the city of Portsmouth. So the pictures on the right here are from the city of Portsmouth. That's the drinking water system there. So went through that pretty quick, but we have any Q&A or anything? Awesome, thank you. So, here you go. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Dale. Our next presenter for today is Chad Northington from REGENESIS. He will be giving the next topic of discussion.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning, everybody. And I apologize in advance. I will have no pop quizzes or prizes now that Dale has set that expectation. So with that, it's been great to see so many refreshing faces behind those masks. I hope you guys feel refreshed as well on that. But we're going to dig in a little deeper today. I do want to go from above ground to below ground, go from ex situ to in situ, and dig in a little deeper on one of the topics that Stephen had mentioned earlier for the use of micron scale colloidal activated carbon for addressing PFAS impacts and what we've been doing over the last several years in that regards. So there's a statement there by ITRC at the bottom that basically says the current state of full-scale PFAS treatment in water is limited absorption using carbon and or mineral media. That was a few years back. Obviously, technologies have advanced since then. We saw a lot of that with Stephen's presentation, but certainly these are the go-tos right now. So imagine, if you will, for a moment, that we could take a proven technology and take it into the subsurface. And this is the part where I tell you we can and we have been. So you can see here, this is a scanning electron microscope image of carbon being applied pre-injection and post-injection in the subsurface. This is 0 to 20 and 0 to 50 micron scale. So it looks really large, but these are actually individual particles in the subsurface. So you can see we're actually coating the aquifer matrix with this carbon, it's a thin layer of carbon, and that allows for rapid absorption of the dissolved phase PFAS. And I like to say we're kind of painting the remedial landscape in the subsurface with this. And so that essentially turns the subsurface into a purifying carbon filter. So there's two key characteristics, though, that will distinguish the colloidal activated carbon from others that we're familiar with. One is obvious, it's the size. So it's about 1 to 2 micron. So compare that to, say, GAC is more like 500 to 1,000. So 1 to 2 micron is more like a red blood cell size. Okay, so we're talking pretty small. You really can't think of it as a particle at this point. So this is colloidal, kind of like milk. It looks like fountain ink, you can see there. So very small particle size, and that's good for a number of reasons. One, it allows us to distribute in the subsurface. We can't cram a 500 micron particle through a 30 micron pore throat diameter, but we can push a 1 micron particle through it. And also you have a greater surface area. The aqueous facing surface area to the contaminants is larger. So we actually have better absorption efficiency than larger particles, which I think Stephen also alluded to earlier. And so the second thing about this is there's a dispersion chemistry, a polymer that's incorporated into the reagent. And that allows it to disperse out because it wants to bind permanently to the aquifer matrix. It will do that. But it also keeps it from going too far and doesn't compromise absorption capacity. So that allows for better distribution overall. So as we're starting to assess these plumes, and as you guys are seeing, these things are running wild and free across the remedial landscape, right? These things can be going for miles in some cases because they're not subject to the natural attenuation mechanisms or the degradation pathways that we normally have with other contaminant classes. So that poses a lot of risk. It poses a lot of problems for sensitive receptors along the way. We've been talking about that a lot. So you got municipal wells, residential wells, surface water bodies, all of these things are being impacted while this thing is running wild and free. So the solution to that is to essentially install colloidal activated carbon permeable reactive barriers, or PRBs. So there's a lot of advantages to this strategy that we're going to get into. So obviously there's no infrastructure or O&M required for this approach. So you don't have that added cost or additional work. It's a passive management strategy. So we're allowing the groundwater to flow through. We're not inhibiting the groundwater flow, and we're grabbing the contaminants as they pass through. There's no waste stream that's going to be generated. This is going to remain in situ within the barrier. And we're able to, with any carbon, to achieve these low PPT, part per trillion standards. So we've been doing modeling. We've looked at this, and we can do decades and decades of treatment with these approaches. And we'll look at that a little closer in a little bit too. And of course, it's cost effective, not only because the infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure and O&M that's required, but also to the point where we've reached enough confidence that we've actually implemented a program called Plume Shield. This just was rolled out this month, where basically REGENESIS is taking on financial risk upfront for design and installation of systems that qualify, if you will. And until we meet agreed upon remedial objectives, there's no payment by the responsible party. So that's my shameless sales plug, but it's unprecedented for our industry and most industries in general, but you'll see the level of confidence we have at this point. So what we're trying to do when we inject is target what we call the flex transport zones. So this is where the bulk of the contaminant mass is flowing through. This is what's dictating the plume behavior, and that's where we want to get the reagent mass in. So we also know that some of that mass is forward diffusing into the lower permeability zones. But what happens is because the carbon's becoming a permanent part of this, there's back diffusion in time from those low permeability zones, but the carbon's in place long-term, indefinitely, essentially. And so it's able to grab any back diffusing mass along with the bulk of the mass that's going through that flux transport zone. So same can be said for anything that could possibly infiltrate from above. So we're able to grab it through these flux transport zones. So as mentioned earlier, this is not a destructive technology. There's not degradation going on. I'm fully convinced that innovation is going to drive other technologies that we'll be able to use synergistically with plume stop and this colloidal technology. We do this at hundreds of sites with plume stop already, where we're out there injecting co-reagents, whether it's electron acceptors or donors, other technologies that can degrade and destroy. You saw earlier, there's actually microbes that they're studying now. So maybe we'll bio-augment, things of that nature once we get that figured out. But in the meantime, our target is eliminating environmental risk. So we know that environmental risk is a product of hazard times exposure. PFAS obviously being the hazard here. If we can eliminate the exposure, we eliminate environmental risk. So this is risk-based corrective action. We've been doing it for decades. We do it at all kinds of sites and different technology or contaminant classes, as you know, to achieve no further action at these sites. So that's our objective here in terms of remedial objectives. So why does carbon work? So this is kind of what's behind any of the carbons. Again, there's a better absorption efficiency with colloidal activated carbon because of the size. But really, you got to look at the Freundlich isotherm, which is what this is. So basically, it's the equilibrium concentration between the dissolved phase and the mass of contaminant on the carbon. So PCE, which is a great candidate for absorption, you can see that if you compare that to PFOA and PFAS, that it really takes 2 to 3 times less carbon to absorb those celebrities of the PFAS world than PCE. So especially these longer chain compounds love to be absorbed. So that's why carbon really works, and that efficiency down at that lower end of the curve is why we can get down to part per trillion ranges. So we'll take a look at, the engineer in me asked to throw in an engineering component slide here. So what we're able to do, which is kind of unique by putting carbon in the ground, is now we can engineer the retardation factor. So essentially what that is how fast is the contaminant moving relative to the velocity of the groundwater? So at our value of 1, they're moving at the same velocity. Our value of 2, then the contaminant is moving at half the speed or velocity as the groundwater, et cetera. So in natural groundwaters, this is typically in the single or double digits for PFAS. When we add carbon, colloidal carbon, we're able to increase that by orders of magnitude. So by increasing the retardation factor, think of that as a slowing down of the particle as it's moving through the barrier, right? Absorption is not a permanent process, it's dynamic, but we're slowing it down as it's moving through that treatment zone. So we're able to do that by orders of magnitude and model that. So for us, the current state of this is that we've done 16 completed applications globally in North America, the Middle East, as well as Europe. This past quarter, we had 4 that were ready to go that should be going. And then we've seen about 100 more that are in the design or regulatory review phase. So this is obviously growing exponentially as more of these sites and more preemptive actions or as regulatory limits are set. Folks are getting very serious about this. So we're generally seeing these 4 types of sites in our domain. Small manufacturing sites, major airports, we've treated at Superfund site, and then Department of Defense sites, DoD sites. And at all of these, we've kept it below regulatory limits or cleanup objectives. We're gonna dig in now though into one of the DoD sites. This is located in Michigan. It's near and dear to my heart. I'm a former Michigander. I went Floridian about 20 years ago. But I used to fish at a river that actually is a sensitive receptor for this particular site on the Savo River. So Some good largemouth bass up there. So this is Grayling Army Field. It was founded over 100 years ago. It's actually one of the largest National Guard training facilities in the country. It is the largest facility. And like many of these sites, it was commingled. And we got the whole package here. So we've got diesel spill originally, and then they found chlorinated solvents. And then of course, more recently, PFAS. And of course, they've used traditional technologies like pump and treat, air sparging, SVE at the site as part of treatment technologies. So here's a bit of a bird's eye view of the airfield. You can see it blown up there. That's the subject area. And it's generally a sandy and gravel aquifer. We got some clay lenses in there, moving at a decent clip, about 200 feet a year. Our treatment interval, our target interval, is about 15 to 27 feet below ground surface here. And relatively low levels of contaminants, but above the regulatory standards, 10 ppb PCE, about 130 ppt total for PFAS, a mix of different PFAS compounds there, predominantly PFAS. And then of course, there's several sensitive receptors just down gradient of where the contaminant plume is. So here you can see a bit of a conceptual rendering of the layout. So it's 9 injection points in an arc there, and there's up gradient wells to see what's coming in and several down gradient wells. And of course, the conceptualized rendering is always much prettier than the actual photo. You can see the pink flags again are the points we injected, the stub ups there for the wells, complete with a state-of-the-art porta potty in the background. So just to give you a little kind of under the hood look at the design process, so you guys can understand how we're arriving at our conclusions, because obviously none of us have treated for 30 or 40 or 100 years yet. We have an internal software called Plume Force. And so this is a fate and transport model for long-term predictive modeling. And besides looking at things like competitive absorption amongst the different contaminants, we also look at degradation, right? We're in the subsurface. We have all these different mechanisms happening. So we're applicable. So with CVOCs, or in this case, diesel as well, those are degrading concurrently with this, and that's freeing up absorption sites as well. So there's a dynamic happening there throughout the process. We have compound specific isotherms. We talked about the isotherm earlier. Those are different for colloidal activated carbon. So we can't just take even a standard GAC because we have better efficiency. So we're looking at specific isotherms, and we do that across a broad range of contaminant classes. So we've got a whole list of different parameters that we look at. Some of these are kind of fixed with maybe the geology or the hydrogeology of the site. Others are things that we can vary or change the parameters, the barrier thickness, the vertical treatment interval, the dosing, and we can start to manipulate those things to say, well, if we want this desired longevity, what kind of dosing do we need, or vice versa? And we can start to work with that model to get us at our endpoint. So an output would look a little bit like this. So you see groundwater flow from left to right. And then we install our colloidal activated carbon barrier. We give it a certain thickness. And then we can look at a snapshot in time, say 30 years, and see, will we have any sort of breakthrough, or are we containing these contaminants? And we can do that for the PCE, for the PFAS compounds, and say that based on our model, we're going to be able to sustain this for X number of decades. A typical model would be 10 to 30 years, I would say, is what we generally run. We can do more than that. In this particular case, using these inputs, and I'll point out 2 important things. So this one, we didn't even assume any degradation, and we assumed an infinite source, which isn't true. But even running those parameters at these concentrations in our dosing, we're looking at over 75 years of treatment based on these model outputs. So we continue to corroborate and use our inputs from different sites to make sure our model is in check, but we're seeing decades of treatment based on the modeling that we're doing. So here's a rendering of the layout for the site again. And so it's a little busy. Let's see, did I get the pointer up there? Yep. So you can see the 9 points are the orange diamonds. We've got up gradient wells, and then we've got a series of paired wells all the way down gradient to about 45 feet down gradient of the points. And those squares in different colors represent what we call searcher cores. So we'll arrive on a site and we can inject, and we'll see if we can get a better ROI right at the beginning of the project. If not, then we'll verify the design ROI, and then we'll start doing full scale. So one of the advantages of working with carbon is that it's a great tracer in the subsurface, obviously. So you can see here from 0 to 30 feet, and then at the 15-foot mark, which is about where the saturated zone begins, we've got very good influence down to our target interval 27 feet, which is just above that confining clay unit. So very obvious distribution. We continue to check that on sites where we would take shaker vials, maybe take a soil sample, add water, or take actually samples from the wells and use a colorimetric test kit in the field to verify the in situ dosing that we're getting and compare that to our model as well. So we call it dynamic remediation. So we're in the field, we're making adjustments and adjusting ROIs and dosing and volumes to get where we want to be. So here's the outputs from this site for the last 2 years approximately. So the red line represents the up gradient well. That's the influx coming in as constant flux mass flux there. And then all the green lines are the down gradient wells sequentially from near the barrier to the farthest point. And you can see there's a very dramatic drop. Generally within the first couple months, we see this sort of drop to non-detect and very low levels. That's been sustained, and you see down gradient, the same effect. The furthest down gradient wells, which were installed later, you can see initially there is a little bit of a detection for PFAS, and then that drops off to non-detect. And that's a result of that clean front of water coming through that's been treated at the barrier and then washing through these further distal zones. And then if we look at the PCE, so that was the PFAS chart, it's very similar trend. You see the PCE coming in, the up gradient well, and then it's a little more pronounced. That initial lag is a little more pronounced in the down gradient well, but the same trend as that clean water front comes through. So this is very typical of all the sites that we've been working on, generally from that first quarter. Again, it's a very fast removal from the dissolve phase and then sustained non-detect or low levels throughout the project. So let me jump to a second case study. This is actually the longest one we have going. This was the first one. It's a Canada site, a former furniture facility, a manufacturing facility. I think we're going on our 5th year now, lost a year in 2020. I think 5th year of monitoring at this site right now. So again, another site where we had commingled contaminants. This initially started as a hydrocarbon site with concentrations in the thousands of ppb range. This was a site with partnered with Rick McGregor with In Situ Remediation Services. And it basically was a shallow site, silty sands. And as a bonus, it had a former fire training area. So 2 candidates for PFAS, and they did look for it, did some assessment, and of course found PFOA and PFAS at the site in the thousands of PPT range. It's predominantly centered around a well MW2. Down here, you see these iso concentration contours. The former area where they suspected the fire training is in that box. So there's about 6 wells that were being monitored and impacted at the site. And so the strategy was a combination. We talked about the combined remedies earlier with Stephen. So in this case, we used plume stop in combination with an electron acceptor, oxygen, providing oxygen, to degrade the petroleum hydrocarbons while also stopping the PFAS plume from migrating any further. So again, you'll see the same results within a very short period of time down to non-detect for the PFOA and PFAS. And then they added 12 more analytes later on. All of those remain non-detect. There is a slight blip for PFAS at about 18 months, which was just above the reporting limit of 20 parts per trillion. I suspect that was cross-contamination, but everything has remained non-detect after that point. So again, rapid reductions and sustained in the subsurface for PFAS compounds at these low PPT ranges. There was a third-party study done for longevity by Dr. Grant Carey. He's with Core Volume Solutions. He's world-class fate and transport modeler. So this was done completely independent of us. There is a paper that's in the remediation journal that shows decades and decades of treatment based on his conclusions to kind of corroborate, again, our modeling that we're doing. So that's available. I can make it available to you if you'd like to dig into that. And if you don't sleep well at night, it is a great sleep aid. But and finally, everybody wants to talk cost, right? So besides what I mentioned earlier about the Plume Shield program for sites that qualify, this gives you an idea of where we're at. So for this particular site, all in turnkey reagents, installation, it was $73,000. So of course, there's no ongoing O&M. Assuming that both scenarios with pump and treat would be monitoring, that's kind of been eliminated from this evaluation. But they estimate about 1.4 million to run for 20 years under those assumptions. So you can see a cost differential there, obviously. And again, the plume stop at this site should last a lot longer than 20 years. So that's not even assuming that this would go further. So really, guys, I guess in summary is that we've got a viable in situ remediation technology. So I think we'll save the questions for the end, right, Gary? All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jeff. Our next presenter, then I'm going to let her announce her discussion today, because actually that is her company's, what should I call it? Your roles and responsibilities of the
Right.
company. So
Yeah.
a little typo on the pad. So.
water characterization, skid, which is the skid removal process, which is separation, concentration, isolation, and disposal. And then project examples of the importance of characterization of water. Really? Okay, so PFAS chemistry. It's been described as a dog's breakfast by somebody in Wisconsin at a conference because, you know, PFAS doesn't just come in singular components. It's not like standards. You know, talking about AFFF, how it differs. You can even have different, I almost think of it as like vintage of an AFFF from one year to the next year, the same manufacturer. The chemistry will be different. The ratios will be different. So you never really know what you're going to encounter because we're only seeing, you know, a partial list of it. So what I'm trying to do is through these slides, I'm going to be reading it, but what I'm trying to do is get concepts together so that we can have a better understanding of what we're doing, right? So it's kind of like a bridge between the engineers, the chemists, and the geologists. So it originated from a failed refrigerant coolant experiment. And I put this in here because of all the chemistry geeks out there. I want you to think about this. It is similar to like a Freon, if you think about it, but with a functional group. So think about what could possibly happen if you cleave off a functional group, okay? It's a little tidbit for you guys to think about, all your chemistry people. It was discovered by accident in 1938 and described as the slipperiest material in existence. The commercial possibilities were and are endless. The chemistry is complicated and not well understood outside of the companies that produce these chemicals. Small and large changes in chemical structure can be made and patented. So the companies protect the proprietary property and do not have to disclose information about these chemicals. And so currently we're playing catch up to identify and treat the changing chemistry. So it's not only changing in length, it's changing in actual structures so that they're branched, the functional groups at the end are changing. It's getting very complicated. So the structure and behavior properties are the most common PFAS found in the environment. You see lots of slides on this, right? But they typically have a carbon fluorine tail and a non-fluorinated head consisting of polar functional group. So the tail is hydrophobic and lipophobic, water and oil fearing, and the head groups are polar and hydrophilic, water loving. So what you're really seeing is these compounds, what they're doing is they're surfactants. In general, that's what they do. So you have the head attaching to the material, and the tail basically is waving and repelling everything off of it, right? So that's why they're stain resistant. That's why they do all different kinds of things, because it's a dual function. And so the replacement chemistry is also geared towards shorter chains with branch functional groups. And this dual behavior is why they're just ubiquitous. They have so many different properties and a lot of different uses. So starting at the end, this is what I really want to make sure that we get across, is that agreement on project objectives, right? Acceptance of the final product. Define the ultimate objectives and goals, post to reach those objectives. This is the compound list. The testing methods. Is the objective non-detect? And what is the definition of non-detect? What are the reporting limits? Acceptance on treatment technology, the ultimate disposal of spent media or reject water. And this criteria will influence the approach to the treatment plan. So this is examples of projects with varied discharge criteria. So these are projects that we have around the country. And do you see it's less than 70 PPT anywhere? No, right? So we're talking about ppm, high ppb concentrations. And so what we have to do is, even though you hear 70 ppt, that's not really what happens. And that's why the previous slide is so important, because you could go along with what you think you're going to be doing for your treatment project, So where is the water ultimately going? So it's going to be going to a wastewater treatment plant. And in many areas, the wastewater treatment plant is saying, I don't want any PFAS. I want zero. I want non-detect. Okay. So now your treatment goal has changed from less than 70 ppt to non-detect. So what is the definition of non-detect? And that's another thing that I really like to stress, is because to me, anything less than 2 ppt is unreasonable. And because just because it's there, it's present. It could be background contamination. It can be so many things. So the lower that our analytical methods go, we're pushing it further down. And we just have to come to an agreement upon what is considered non-detect, right? Because you could have someone saying, well, the laboratory can get down to 0.1 ppt. Well, that's not reasonable and that's not practical. But that's why you're going to have discussions with the water treatment plant, the regulators, whoever is contributing the water, and the people that are doing the treatment. You really have to have agreement on the project objectives. I like to have them completely written into the proposal so that 6 months don't go down the road and something is changed and we're not in agreement on something. So the trend towards higher concentration treatment and lower discharge criteria. So biosolids dewatering, landfill leachate treatment, emergency response to AFFF releases, construction dewatering in areas where there actually is some pretty elevated concentrations, Wisconsin, Michigan, for example, and industrial discharges. So these make up the bulk of our treatment projects across the US. All right, here we go. So we've talked a lot about this. You've seen a lot of presentations about analytical. So I'm going to try to break it down and explain why the analytical methods are able to see so low, and also give you a broader understanding of what it is you're seeing and not seeing, okay? So LCMS by MS, including 537 series, these methods are targeted analysis methods. So the reason why you get to see down so low is because you have multiple mass specs that are sorting. So they're sorting out everything that could be similar to get down to a very specific structure, right? So a small change in the chemical structure would make the compound invisible because the current methods being employed commercially are so targeted and so selective. So Tara, I have to change my presentation because now I believe that there's more than 40 that are standards. So I need to change that. So we're dealing with all of these compounds that could potentially be out there, but we're only able to see about 40 of them with analytical standards that you can do for quantitative analysis. This is an example. So you see the one on the left. If you just replaced one of those fluorines with a hydrogen, that analyte is invisible to your analysis, your report. So let's say you had a whole bunch of that. You're not going to see it in your report, okay? Because these methods are so targeted. It's a dual-edged sword. It's wonderful because you can see down very, very low, but at the same time, you're not seeing a lot of different compounds that could be there as well. So it's important for a lot of reasons, but it's very important for me because when I'm doing high concentration PFAS analysis, treatment, if these concentrations are so high that if I don't know exactly what's in there, I could be expending media much quicker than I anticipated, right? So developing less targeted analytical options. The top assay, which is great. I think it's a good thing to do in the beginning of the project, just for what I mentioned, so that I have a better characterization of all the potential PFAS that I'm going to be encountering. And I have to make another change to my presentation because EPA method 50/50 followed by 90/56 for fluorine analysis. So this gives you a total organic fluorine content. My recollection in the laboratories that I had spoken to at the time, it was in the ppm range. So I stand corrected. Now the reporting limits are lower, but still it's not getting you down to the low PPT that would be necessary to make a good assessment. So this method is good for highly concentrated waste streams to get an understanding of the fluorine content. This is one that I'm hoping that someone will come up with. Are there any more older laboratory people around? Does anybody remember TPH by IR? Yeah, you do? Okay. Oh, oh, it's Norm. All right. So TPH by IR was a colorimetric test that you would be able to do, and you'd be able to see a response for all of the carbon to hydrogen bonds that you'd have in there, right? So wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a method that we could use for total fluorine by IR? There actually is, but that also is in the 1 ppm range. So I'm actually hopeful that we'll be able to get this done and get a lower reporting limit, because this would be an incredible tool that you could do right in the field to get an assessment of what the total chlorine to fluorine content that you'd actually have, right? This is another one that I love. I would love my company to buy, but they're probably not going to. The time of flight LCMS, it's very promising, but currently very time consuming and labor intensive. So this is the non-target analysis. You've heard other people talk about it before, but what's the beauty of it is that you'd be able to create a library of unknown compounds and be able to look for them. And you could see what's happening, if there's anything coming through or all kinds of stuff. It's very expensive, but it's really the only tool that's out there that you could get non-targeted analysis. It's not going to be quantitative, but you're going to have a true understanding of what the unknowns are that we can't really see with any other method right now. So non-selective PFAS removal from water. So adsorptive media such as GAC, organoclays, and others will remove PFAS non-selectively. So ion exchange media will also remove the contaminants Yeah, I think I have that down there wrong. Okay, well, all right, so that actually is incorrect. What I meant to say is that the ion exchange will also remove other contaminants, but in a different way. They will target the polar end of the analyte, right? And so some resins have some porosity that they're able to take the head and the tail, right? So the more we learn about the replacement chemistry, the easier it will be to adapt and adjust adsorptive and ion exchange medias if required. And currently non-detect for all identified PFAS compounds is achievable. The issue is some analytes have a short breakthrough time. So this can be managed with a good analytical and maintenance program. So what are the implications of selective identification and non-selective removal? So understand that it was reported may not be the complete picture of PFAS in the water. Non-selective removal of PFAS will be impacted by other constituents in the water, and that's why comprehensive water chemistry is helpful in designing and maintaining a treatment system that best fits the characteristics of the incoming water. So, plating facilities will have different characteristics. AFFF impacted water will have different characteristics. Industrial applications for making fabrics that are non-stick coating. And so you have to have an idea of what to expect and know which of these things will be problematic for your treatment approach. Standard isotherms for carbon usage are rarely a good indicator of what to expect for the lifetime of a carbon system for PFAS because of the competitive absorption from TOC, VOCs, et cetera. And not only that, but the actual way that the isotherms are run is that you use, remember when I said dog's breakfast, right? So when you do an isotherm, it's normally done in regular DI water or some reference source water, and you're doing single component spiking. It really has no relevance to what you're going to see in the world, right? So, and you can't predict what the other contaminants are in your sample because you're only seeing a very small portion of it. So it's really not a good indicator. Sorry. I don't know if anyone loves them. So a conservative approach to PFAS water treatment is the best defense throughout the life cycle of a PFAS project. I'm gonna take a little water. And so why do I really care about conservative? It's really important to my company because not only do we do the treatment, but we're also taking in everybody else's waste, right? And so we are trying to be as conservative as possible to protect ourselves, but also protect our customers. So identification, obtain a comprehensive analysis of the incoming water to evaluate competitive and analytes for adsorption and ion exchange. We talked about earlier, I guess I should put agreement of project objectives first now. Confirm with all parties what expectations are for the discharge water, what constitutes non-detect, and what analyte lists and methods are to be used. Pilot studies, I love them. They're wonderful. They're the best indicator of what your carbon usage or your media usage is going to be. However, for a lot of our systems, we do not have time for that. So what we have to do is we have to have a pretty robust treatment train in the beginning, especially for the very high concentration streams. And then we adjust as we go along, because as you can see, what we're expected to deliver is non-detect. So you don't really have room for error there. So selecting approach and equipment, comparing costs and benefits to find the right fit for the application throughout the complete life cycle of the project, not just mobilization and in the initial equipment costs. It's also how much media are you going to be consuming? What do you want to do with that media? We'll talk about this, later, but final deposition of spent media and associated solids, landfill, incineration, or reactivation. What I offer is closed loop landfill and hazardous incineration, okay? If somebody wanted to reactivate their media, we're not third partying any media to any Subtitle D landfill, any other Subtitle C landfill, or to reactivation. And that's just a protective mechanism that we've done in Clean Harbors. That's one thing that I would like to say. You have options, but we wouldn't be doing it for you, right? So if you chose to do another method of disposal. Okay, so separation and media choice. Complicated influent water requires treatment trains. Sequential removal of contaminants based on their affinity for the media. This is another shout out to laboratory people. Similarities for column choices in chromatography and media choice for removing contaminants. So you can think of your retention time and your mass transfer zone as very similar concepts, okay? So just like one column doesn't work for all of your analyses, one media definitely does not work for all of your contaminants, your PFAS contaminants, okay? And the other co-contaminants that are present. So it's very similar, and I am lucky because I don't have to just go with one particular media. I can test a whole bunch of them against each other to find the best one that fits for the application. We've also found, because of what I call our test kitchen, which I'll show you later, we have branded some mixtures. And we've also come up with a proprietary process for high concentration, which I'll briefly touch on in the end. So the skid approach to PFAS water treatment is to separate contaminants from the water by mechanical filtration, adsorption, and ion exchange. So concentrate, the contaminants are concentrated from large volumes of water onto relatively small quantities of media. Now, another point that's really, I don't want to liberate anything, okay? I don't want to transform anything. So my whole concept is this skid. I want to separate it, I want to concentrate it, I want to isolate it, and then dispose of it. Whatever that disposal choice that the customer chooses. But I don't want to be liberating PFAS. I don't want to be transforming it. And so as long as I follow this particular method, it's a conservative approach that delivers, pretty I don't know what else really can get you down to non-detect on a consistent level for really high concentration water. All right, so the difference between skid and non-skid treatment. So skid options would be GAC. So most widely accepted for PFOA and PFOS. It still does well for shorter chain compounds. I just want people to understand that. It's just that the exchange frequency is more frequent. You can definitely remove them all. It's just for how long you're gonna have that complete removal, right? So resins, resin is wonderful. I absolutely love it. For a lot of my applications though, I don't have the option of being able not to foul it up immediately, okay? So it definitely plays a role in the treatment train, but I don't wanna waste anybody's money by having it fouled immediately. So pre-treatment is required, right? So clays, zeolites, and other adsorbent media, very, very effective for non-potable water. When I tell you that this is why we're doing mixtures and branding, is because different mixtures of these absorbent medias do an incredible job. And I'll tell you when we get to a slide, I'll explain that a little bit more. So non-skid options, oxidation and other destructive technologies. There's a couple of reasons why we don't do these. The first one being that we don't have a lot of time to do a complete study. And with destructive technologies, you really have to make sure that you're not creating any other problem by not using enough energy or whatever your destructive process is. Because you definitely don't want to take a long chain a long chained PFAS and create a short chain one. Because honestly, the longer the carbon chain is, the easier it is for removal. So I don't want to be creating an environment that's actually harder for me to treat, okay? The second one, what's the, oh geez, I don't even know where I went with that. That's too small. Oh, okay. Yeah, and then a lot of times I would only say that you could be used in a static system. So in a lot of process systems, the influent will vary based upon a batch that they're doing or something changes in the environment. And so your energy consumption would be variable. So it's not a huge or good fit for anything that we're currently doing. Reverse osmosis, love it. I think it's fabulous. However, it does create a reject stream that still needs to be dealt with. So let's say you had a 90% efficient RO system and you had a 100 GPM system. So then you'd still have to deal with 10 GPM of something that you had to deal with, right? So that doesn't really fit our model. And having worked and sold RO, one of the unsung heroes of the world are RO technicians. And they're hard to keep on staff. So although I think it's great for fixed facilities if that's a decision that they want to make, but for us, we're not doing RO. And that would be a non-skid, right? Because you create that waste stream. So what roles in the project lifecycle analytical methods play for water treatment projects? The identification stage, the need to estimate total PFAS to be encountered. This will determine usage rate and type of treatment applied. The agreement on project objectives, we talked about that a lot. Piloting we talked about. The exchange frequency you can determine by changing between beds. And then O&M, so monitoring between beds dictates exchange frequency of active full-scale systems. For low flow applications, your analytical winds up being a big cost expense. It is expensive based on gallons treated, but it is an amazing tool that'll help you keep your non-detect, right? And then disposal of spent media, the requirements for media acceptance for landfill and incineration or wherever else you're going to be doing it, you're still probably going to need to do some testing on the back end. I use this because it stresses the importance of communication between the laboratory you're using, the customer, the treatment people that you're using. Everybody needs to be communicating. So if you see over on the left, it looks like pretty much like flat lines, right? Well, that's because the 6.2 FTS was at, I think it was at 70,000 PPT, and they decided to change a chemical in their process. Hey, we got a new media that we're not media, but a new application that we're going to use. So it went from 70,000 to 700,000 PPT. So they got a hit. See over on the right, that's an analytical hit. And what had happened was that now all the lab people don't like me. I've heard that my samples are nasty, right? Well, this was an example of probably a bad sample. But what happened was we blew out an instrument. And so luckily we had another sample that they could run at a dilution. So we didn't actually have a hit on the effluent, but it showed up. So that's why it's really good to have good communication with your laboratory, everybody, so that you're not destroying instrumentation for laboratories. You're not creating the need to rerun samples. Also, for a lot of things, you have to understand that sometimes they need to be run twice, right? To make sure that you're able to see the reporting limits that you need to see for certain compounds to be there. So again, good communication is key, especially for analytical. This is the test kitchen. So this one has been wonderful. It's still ongoing. And so this is a military installation on the West Coast. It had high concentration of PFAS, VOC, TOC, SVOCs, oil and grease, TSS, and TDS. So they asked us, the engineering firm asked me to put together a treatment system for a piloting project that they were going to do, and this was about 3 years ago. And the medias that I chose initially had other duties. And what it turned out was that seeing this high concentration, we're talking about 11 parts per million. The heavy lifting that was done by the pre-treat medias was incredible, okay? And so they've found a place in my heart because they do such amazing things. Different ones do different things. But we were able to really put this through the paces because we had different water from different tanks. So we had some that had a pH of 3, pH of 11, all different types of AFFF, the newer concentrated ones, the older ones. So it really enabled us to look at the analytical and see which medias do best for different things. So it was almost like having 20 or 30 different sites in one piloting, because we were getting different tanks from different times. So it's really instrumental. And so the analytical really helped us develop new media combinations. Again, so the discharge criteria was 11 ppm, and we had to get down to less than 20 ppt for PFOA, PFOS. This is a case study for a petroleum processing client in the upper Midwest. The importance of this analytical was the fast turnaround time and then also having a correct list. So we had a customer that had an event and they needed a treatment system on site. So we were able to speak with them and an engineering firm, decide on a treatment train, and had that delivered and set up within 3 days. And this was for 200 GPM. And then the customer actually made the decision that they wanted non-detect for all 24 compounds on the DoD list. No one told them that they needed to do this. This was their determination. So we had to set up the analytical, make sure that the laboratory could do this. They were able to get us the quick turnaround time so that we could show that the system was in compliance. So this was I think in the very beginning, it was like in the hundreds of thousands PPT. It has come down, but they've been able to maintain non-detect for all 24 compounds for about 2 years now. Actually, it almost might be, Yeah, I think it's just 2 years now. So again, the speed of being able to have this set up. In the meantime, we have put up another 200 GPM stream, so they have it's operating at 400 GPM. This was a case study for an industrial plater in Michigan, and this is an example of how you get such a wide variety in the influent water. They had this is in the state of Michigan, where they had said if they didn't meet their discharge requirements of less than 12 ppt, that they would have to shut down the plant. So we put together some media trials and were able to set it up. And this was probably the most complicated influent water that I've ever encountered. And we made some adjustments, we did some pre-treatment, and we were able to get this down. And just an example of how complicated that influent water was that they put an aspirin in one of the beds. Just an aspirin. You know, why do you do that? Oh, because we've been doing it for 30 years. So the chemistry, even to them, was a little unknown. So huge variability. Like if they decided to do one type of thing one day, it would change greatly. So we had to come up with systems that could handle that variability. So again, characterization of your water, having a really good list of all the analytes that might be in there. And good communication, so you can get good water characterization, so you can create a good treatment plan. I threw this one in here because this is another food for thought one. Background ambient PFAS concentrations in soil. So can you guys see that? I think you're gonna get this presentation, but you can see that it's on the either side of 1 part per billion in ambient concentrations, like in national parks and things like that. So I guess that's another plug for us saying why I'm not a real huge fan of going less than 2 ppt, is because now we're talking about you could potentially have 1 ppb in ambient soils, nowhere near where you would have a source contamination. So that's just a little tidbit. And I think that might be it. Oh, so what's next? We're working on a PFAS treatment enhancement solution trials, and it's going to be for 1,000 parts per million of AFFF impacted wastewater. So the process includes an enhancement solution, a specialty media removal system that's targeted for a very high concentration PFAS treatment. So this is going to be happening in the next 3 or 4 months. I hope to be able to have slides to discuss that, but that's a game changer, right? So it's going to still follow the SCID method. So there's going to be separation, concentration, no liberation. So what we're trying to do is just take really high concentration, bring it down to a small amount of media. And I just want to say why I think this is so important, because if we're able to treat very high concentration water, we're saving so much, because if you let this get dispersed further down, it's so much more expensive to treat low concentration. Legitimately, I like to figure out what the economic basis is, but if you're able to treat and follow where the source is, it's going to be, I think, more manageable for us to treat PFAS in the environment. So I think that's it. Did I go over? Thank you. Oh, okay.
Thank you, AnnieLu, on that. Our last presenter is a pre-recorded session, I believe, right, guys, that we're going to play for Caitlin's a presenter. Very good.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good morning from Arlington, Virginia. I am so sorry I couldn't be with you all in person today. After about 1.5 years of planning with Jean to be here, unfortunately, my vaccination appointment conflicted with that. So out of an abundance of caution, I went ahead and provided a pre-recorded presentation. I wasn't sure how I would be feeling. The presentation you're going to hear today is from my esteemed colleague, Dave Campisti. He is our Senior Manager of Business Development for our Emerging Contaminants program. I know you'll enjoy it. And I also wanted to say before we get into it, we are growing our program. We have opportunities on our PFAS team available. If that's of interest to you, please feel free to reach out to me directly at caitlin.berretta@evoqua.com. With that, I will pass it to David to go ahead and start, and I'll be on for any Q&A that follows.
Good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be. Thank you for joining us today. My name is David Compisi. I work with Evoqua Water Technologies. I'm the Senior Business Development Manager for Emerging Contaminants. And my juvenile joke that I lead off with is how you spell emerging contaminants. And that's PFAS. That seems to be the majority of my attention, and that's where I'm talking focus today. So again, thanks for joining me, and look forward to walking through this slide deck. 25 slides or so. I'm going to be talking about commercial technology applications of PFAS. And just to keep the punchline up front, I'm looking across different technologies, and there is no one PFAS. There is not a destructive technology that can work in all applications. There is not an absorption technology that can change resin that is better in all instances and they recommend carbon, nor is spray recommended the preferred application. It all depends upon the particular treatment objectives and solution that the customer is looking for and site constraints.
A variety of other factors that need to be considered. So the point I'm trying to make is that there is a comprehensive solution that should be analyzed and looked at in its entirety before just going with a scripted response. Evoqua Water Technologies, we're a leading provider of water and wastewater treatment solutions. So we offer a broad portfolio of different products. Here are our core commitments, and these are our core commitments that we make to ourselves, and these are our core commitments that we make to our customers as well. You can see our purpose, our vision, and our values listed on this slide. Transforming water and enriching lives, or enriching life. Water plays an instrumental role in our everyday lives, so much more than just drinking water. And because water is everywhere, so are we. Our vision, the world's first choice for water solutions. It's a critical and it's a finite resource, and we want to treat it accordingly and understand how to provide treatment aspects to any operation, more so than just drinking water. When I first came on board, I was thinking things in terms of drinking water or remediation aspects, and we certainly do that. But we play a much larger role in the water world as well. I mean, we're involved with everything from mining and manufacturing operations to paper and pulp processes to food and beverages and pharmaceuticals and microelectronics, as well as the aforementioned drinking water and remediation, wastewater, of course. And then I'd like to draw your attention to one particular value, the sustainable aspect of our operations, and we measure things in regards to our footprint and our handprint, with the footprint being our impact on the environment from Evoqua operations, but the handprint is taking a deeper look at how our teaming with Evoqua can change or positively affect the sustainability metrics of our customers. And so more of a comprehensive life cycle analysis of the offerings that we offer, again, to our customers. So no PFAS 101 slide, but I do have the PFAS tree on here and another juvenile pun that we will just touch on this briefly, and then we will leave it. And then I've got a couple of books that I wanted to make mention of here. I was the lead editor on both of these texts, and they talk about PFAS across the spectrum of challenges in this dynamic space. And so you can look at those challenges, or you can bin them in the regulatory world or the analytical chemistry world, toxicological advancements, and remediation technologies. And so there are challenges across all these spaces, but they are also advancing at the same time, and they are continuously changing. And they, for instance, affect one another. And an example could be the regulatory process being influenced by the number of analytes that you can test for, or EPA approved methodologies that they can identify, or what we have standards today for, or those limits of detection and the method detection limits and the method reporting limits. And as those go lower, perhaps the regulations would adjust accordingly as well. But they're all intertwined, and they're all moving forward, and they make this space very challenging. Yet, I don't think fun's the right word, but they make it new and emerging and exciting. This slide talks to some of the routes of exposure or the health effects associated with PFAS, and again, continuing to emerge, but from an exposure route, and again, drawing your text your eyes to the red text, the exposure routes, you can have defensible exposures that occur from a safety and occupational health perspective if you're a primary producer or working with these chemicals in close proximity. From a affected community perspective, it's oftentimes correlated to contaminated or polluted drinking water. And but from a larger perspective, there is a contribution, significant contribution we are finding made from atmospheric transport of these chemicals in the atmosphere to the ocean throughout the planet. Atmospheric transport is a significant consideration that needs to be understood more, where we seem to be focusing more on the drinking water aspect or cleanup aspect, but more to follow on that. And then I just also draw your attention to the C8 health study, a 69,000 person strong effort that was done at the conclusion of the liability, the legal outcome of the Washington Works plant in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and the communities that were affected. But they found the positive correlations to those 6 conditions, adverse health effects that you see on this slide. And toxicology, using animal models, some of the limitations of that. Well, this was an epidemiological study, and it was of significant size. So I just have more confidence in studies like that for definitive adverse health effects. And then on the analytical challenges, I will, walk through at the top. We're talking about the increasing number of compounds to be identified. In 537, it was 14, then moved to 18 with 537.1, and now we're at 25 compounds, focusing on short chain compounds. Both of these methodologies are for drinking water. Red text, no published methodologies for any other matrix. So that's the state of the science today. It's difficult to look at some of the questions we have from an air sampling perspective if we don't have an agreed upon interagency, interlaboratory approved methodology. And there are defensible methods that can be used, but there isn't an agreed upon methodology, and so that makes things challenging. And then you get modified methodologies, and they're user defined. So what does user defined mean? You're not always sure. So it's slow but emerging and getting, we're already at parts per trillion, and we're getting better and better and lower limits of detection. So how is that going to affect things moving forward? An interesting question. And this slide talks about PFAS removal technologies. Generally speaking, you can group those into adsorptive, separation, and destructive technologies. The adsorptive ones are listed on this slide: granular activated carbon and single pass ion exchange resin, or regenerable ion exchange resin for that matter. Separation technologies, membranes like nanofiltration, reverse osmosis, or foam fractionation techniques. And destructive technologies are the plasmas, electrochemical oxidation, senolysis, but those technologies don't, there's scale up issues currently with those. There are costing issues, there are regulatory acceptance hurdles that need to be overcome. So they're not necessarily ready as mature, certainly not as mature for the market today, but they may be tomorrow. So certainly worth continuing to invest in and monitor those. But for today's conversation, we'll just be speaking about the GAC and the single pass ion exchange resin. GAC, named best available technology by the EPA. It's been around for a long time, right? There's the Sanskrit text from 2000 or from thousands of years ago that talks about storing your water in copper vessels, exposing it to sunlight, and filtering it through charcoal, activated carbon's predecessor. It's accepted in the regulatory community. Operators are familiar with it. It requires minimal maintenance. There's another bullet on this slide talks about removing other organic contaminants. So that can be a good thing or a bad thing. We've got a customer right now that has a problem with removing volatile organic compounds with their air stripper. Now they've discovered PFAS. Granular activated carbon is allowing them to remove the air stripper, and it handles the carcinogenic VOC problem and their PFAS problem. So that's a good thing. However, you can have other organics in the water that you don't necessarily want to target, but the carbon doesn't care that. And it's impacting the carbon's capacity for the target organic or the contaminant of concern. And so that would result in greater changeout, and greater frequency of changeout is going to result in increased cost. So you have to balance that. Where the ion exchange resin has a lower empty bed contact time, can have a higher flow rate therefore, which results in a smaller footprint. And if that's of particular concern to your site or your customer, or even from an aesthetic perspective, then this might be the solution for you. And you generally get a higher throughput with the ion exchange resin if the background water chemistry is situated or suited to be low in anion compounds or competing anions. But that higher throughput comes at a higher cost. Ion exchange resin generally costs more than granular activated carbon. So now you've got to do the next iteration in the calculation to understand if just the economics of the situation and increased water treated versus increased media cost. Also mentioned spent resin can be incinerated. That's the disposal mechanism, whereas the granular activated carbon can be reactivated. There can be some sustainability metrics that can be afforded to a customer that's going through a reactivation process, but there is a mechanism for the resin, and that's through incineration. But incineration costs are going up, and so that has to be considered in, again, the life cycle analysis. I see that I am in jeopardy of going over my 25-minute allocation here at slide 10, but let me just talk about the importance of performance testing to say that each water matrix, this is what I'm trying to impress upon the whole talk, is that it depends. It depends on the water quality, depends on the customer, depends upon the site constraints. And so how do you know which is the best performing media? You run a pilot, and this pilot, here's a picture of a pilot, and you can do this full scale and get greater scale up accuracy with what the full scale is going to perform like, or you can do this on an accelerated bench scale testing called the rapid small scale column test, which the scale up is harder, but you get results a lot quicker, and you're going to get a comparison between media A versus media B, and then you can do the costing calculation, and then you can take in other things into consideration, like the regulatory acceptance, as well as footprint and items we've previously mentioned. But you do this ahead of time, and this is important to consider so that when you operate these systems for tens and tens of years, it makes a difference when you find the most efficient or nearly the most efficient methodology. You want to find the most efficient mechanism to remove these chemicals. Additionally, I would say that it's important oftentimes to have the ability to treat water early and upfront while you do the pilot testing, while you do the rapid small-scale column testing, and you can make water in the order of weeks as opposed to months or a year in order to get a $1 million plus grant or something along those lines, or regulatory approval. But if it's an emergency situation, there are capabilities and technologies that allow you to get after making clean water today for rapid response. Okay, now I'd like to share with you two case studies, one of them applying granular activated carbon and the other using ion exchange resin for removal of these chemicals from water. This first one is from Kennebunkport and Wells Water District, and this is in Maine, and were impacted with PFAS in their water. Source was identified as wastewater treatment plant sludge, as well as bioash and sludge from a paper mill. And so the municipality, based upon previous experience and familiarity with the technology, decided they wanted to go with granular activated carbon. Evoqua advised Kennebunkport to go ahead and pilot several types of carbon to determine which perform best given their, again, local water chemistry. And the results showed that a carbon made from coconut provided an additional 3 months of full-scale runtime versus the other carbons. So in the end, the Kennebunkport and Wells Water District installed a full-scale high-pressure system to remove PFAS from their water effectively. Here's some of the data that is associated with the case study and doing the pilot. Viewers right, you'll see the picture of the pilot. And then you can also see on the x-axis, I have bed volumes treated. And on the y-axis is the PFOA concentration coming in around 10 nanograms per liter. And you can see the breakthrough profile for the various carbons that were evaluated. You can see a TOC, no units listed here, but they are milligrams per liter. And again, that can negatively affect the absorptive capacity of the granular activated carbon and can affect different carbons differently. And so that's the benefit of running this particular test. And you can see the AC1230CX product hadn't broken through by 25,000 bed volumes while the other carbons had started to exhibit breakthrough. So in the end, we came away with a single 12-foot sand vessel being incorporated up front as pre-treatment to remove any dissolved or suspended solids from contaminating or causing increased pressure differential in the granular activated carbon system, and a granular activated carbon system composed of a lead lag vessel was incorporated. And you can see the other metrics on this table, but the customer segregated react and return implementation was implemented, and you can save some significant costs, both back to the handprint footprint analogy for sustainability perspective, as well as just cost. You can react that carbon for much cheaper. You're not using virgin material. And then there are attrition losses that are associated with that, but on the order of 10 to 12 to 15%, and then you just make that up with virgin carbon, and you continue to treat water. I'll also mention that the SEPTA design is something that we offer that allows different media to be placed into the same vessels. And so if you would like to change to ion exchange resin later on here because they have to go after a particular compound that's more favorably removed by IEX, that can be accomplished. If there's a new novel adsorbent that comes to the market that is cheaper and works as good or nearly as good, but the financials indicate that that's a smart way to proceed, well, then that can be accomplished as well with the SEPTA design. And so this is just rolling the case study up, but talking about minimal impact to the ratepayers and clean water being produced, which is ultimately the end goal and objective of having safe, affordable, clean drinking water. So in summary, trying to understand and provide a broad portfolio of technologies and capabilities to provide a comprehensive solution. That's what's important. There's no one panacea for all PFAS removal situations, and you want to also understand and partner with someone that has the capability to do pilot testing, has the ability to get temporary mobile assets on site for treatment today or sooner rather than later, to understand some of the nuances of putting permanent solutions in and large scale systems. But then after the fact, what are you going to do with when you need a change out? Is there a robust servicing network, and has that been demonstrated? How's the safety record of the individuals that are working with these, changing out these vessels and supplying fresh media? Is there a play for reactivation? What is the disposal know-how? And resin disposal costs keep going up, and people taking or failing to take resin. And so it's a, again, dynamic situation, constantly changing. Partner with someone that has this comprehensive offering that can identify the unique solution that fits for each unique situation. Finally, action steps. This is talking towards assessing the risk at your particular site. Are they driven by regulatory requirements today that exist, or ones that are pending or that may come, or that probably are not being looked at today? There are brand concerns that need to be identified. If your brand is water, you don't want to deal with these sorts of contaminants in your finished product, regardless of what the state regulations are. So consider the risk and try to quantify it. And then if you move towards doing a more thorough sampling to understand the extent and the level of PFAS contamination, understand the analytical partner that you are working with, and the standard operating procedures that are followed and the certifications that they have. Are they going to be accepted by the regulatory community? The method detection limits versus the method reporting limits, and some of the statistical nuances of those differences. If you're going to collect the data, what are you going to do with the data? Ask that question beforehand. And then look at the remedial alternatives and try to understand the entire life cycle and what that's going to look like, not from a 1-year perspective, but a 5 or 10 or 20-year perspective. Look towards, do you want to investigate destructive technologies? If you have a smaller flow system, some of these technologies might be ready for you sooner rather than later. Or if you're going to concentrate the PFAS, how are you going to handle that? What's the ultimate disposal methods? Think through all of those particular questions and have answers, or partner with someone that can get you those appropriate answers.
Okay, thank you very much, Caitlin and crew. We're running a little over, you guys. I think I saw a couple virtual hands up that we did have up there. And then if there's anybody here within the room that would like to ask a question, please feel free.
The one question I have from anonymous attendees for Chad: have you performed analysis on the soils from the carbon treatment area to verify or qualify mass absorption? Do you expect degradation to PFAS or just simply sequestering?
Yeah, thanks, David. So generally our sampling is focused on groundwater. It's in the saturated zone. So, you know, typically folks aren't pulling saturated soil samples after the fact. It's the post or down gradient samples that are confirming that we are containing or sequestering, I guess, if you will, the contaminants in the carbon media. So that's, I'm not aware of soil samples, but I'll look into that for that particular question.
Was the only one? Anybody else? It's all set. Well, thank you very much to the panel.
Thank you.